This is Patrick Russell. I'm interviewing Clinton Rodgers for the first time. This interview is taking place at American Falls on July 22nd, 2021, and this interview is being conducted by the Making History Project. How are you doing, Clinton?
I'm doing good. I'm doing really good today, thank you.
All right, and could you first tell me what your date of birth is?
August the 11th, 1947.
And where were you born?
I was born in Blackfoot, Idaho.
All right, and tell me a little bit about Blackfoot. What is it like?
Blackfoot's a very small town. It's kind of like a town where everybody knows what everybody else does. And I enjoyed living there when I was a kid. We had a lot of fun and done things, and some things we probably shouldn't have done, but we did it. But it was a good town for us, I think, at the time.
Is it a rural place?
Well, it's halfway between Pocatello and Idaho Falls. It's a population of about 10,000, maybe 12,000 people.
And what's it best known for?
I don't know what Blackfoot is best known for other than their name, which is named after the Indians, the Blackfoot Indians. So there's not a lot there.
And how big was your family growing up?
I had 5 brothers and 4 sisters.
Nice family, big.
Mm-hmm.
And where were you in that pile?
I was number 8.
Okay. And you got a lot of hand-me-downs?
Sometimes, yes. We had to share a lot of things when we were kids.
Okay. And what did your parents do?
My father was a farmer his whole life. He actually didn't own a farm, but he ran farms for different people. And I remember we moved a lot because he'd get with one person and another person would want him, and he got well known for doing that. So he had a lot of people that wanted to have him work for him.
And did he have a particular type of specialty as a farmer?
He knew he was a great farmer. He knew more about it than most people did because he'd spent his whole life doing it.
And what about your mother? What did she do?
My mother was a housewife taking care of 10 kids. Well, I think we only had, the largest amount was 7 together at one time, at home at one time. But she worked hard. She done all the cooking from scratch, and she watched over us kids when my father worked. And she worked as a cook a lot of times for other farmers when they were doing the harvest, and for my father when they were harvesting.
Okay. And did you go to high school?
I didn't finish high school. I finished part of my junior year and I dropped out.
Okay. What was the name of your school?
The Blackfoot High School.
All right. And did you play any sports or do any hobbies when you were there?
I played football and I played basketball. And I loved basketball.
Uh-huh.
I played, and I really enjoyed it. I tried every sport. I tried baseball and different things. So I enjoyed the sports.
Okay. So you dropped out. What did you do?
When I dropped out of school, I remember my father, the day after I dropped out, he come up into my bedroom and he says, "You're going to drop out of school?" And I said, "Yes." And he says, "Well, I'm going to tell you something. You're not going to sit here in this bed while I'm working. You better have a job today." So I went out and got a job with my brother-in-law who had a farm, and worked for him for quite some time.
All right. So as like a farmhand?
Well, I've done different things for him. I drove truck a lot for him. He had a fertilizer truck, and we used to have to drive it from that desert out there to Idaho Falls, and I'd pick up the fertilizer and bring it back, spread it out through the field, and I done that. I moved sprinkler lines for him a lot, just about a variety of things.
Okay. And how long did you do that for?
I didn't do that very long because when I turned 19, they drew my number to be drafted, but I decided I didn't want to be drafted because I wanted to choose what I wanted to do instead of them choose what they wanted me to do. So I joined the Army.
All right. And the draft was for the Vietnam War?
Yes.
All right. And why did you choose the Army?
I don't know. I chose the Army basically because it was where I could do what I wanted to do, and that was helicopters, and they had a lot of them at that time. And I talked to a recruiter, and he told me that basically they had a lot of choppers in Vietnam at the time, and so that's what I chose to do, was to not to fly them, but to be mechanics and different things with them.
And how did you develop this interest in helicopters?
I really didn't. I just heard about it, and I decided that's what I'd like to do. Had never flown in one. In fact, I don't think I'd ever seen one before, because at that time there weren't very many flying over the U.S. They were mostly in Vietnam. So, but that's what I chose to do.
So it's something that just looked cool to you?
I guess.
Yeah.
At 19, a lot of things look cool that aren't, I guess.
Well.
But yes, it was interesting. It was just interesting to me to be able to do that.
All right. And so, how did your family feel about you getting drafted and then enlisting?
Well, I had a close brother. He was 2 years older than me, and our birthdays were the same day, so we grew up closer together than most of us. And he wasn't happy about it. He was worried about it. And then I had a younger brother that later on told me he prayed for me every day I was there, and I believe he did. My mother, she was very emotional. Of course, she knew where I was going. I probably end up in Vietnam, and she was very emotional. My father was one of those guys that loved us, took care of us, but didn't show those emotions. He had them, I know he did, but he just didn't show them. So it wasn't a good thing, but I think my whole family was upset over it. They knew where I was going to end up, and they didn't know what was going to happen to me no more than I did. So.
And did any other brother get drafted or enlist?
No, I had not during Vietnam. I had two brothers that served in the Marine Corps. One of them served for 8 years in the Marines, and the other one spent 4 years and got out.
Same time period, or?
No, they were back in the 50s. He and I was joined in the 60s. My oldest brother actually served as a he went to Vietnam as an advisor, a military advisor, and he spent time there. That was long before the war escalated into what it was when I got there.
And you got your draft notice by the mail?
I can't remember for sure. I believe I did, yes.
And how do you feel when you open that up? Like, what goes through your mind at that moment?
Well, what went through my mind was Vietnam. I knew what was going on, and I knew why I was being drafted, and I knew I was going to end up there, and it was very nerve-wracking. It was very, you get scared before you even go. I mean, it's something that most people can't feel. They'll never understand unless they went through it.
And what was your highest rank in the Army?
I was a buck sergeant. I had 3 stripes. During Vietnam, we were promoted pretty fast, and so I got promoted 2 different times in Vietnam. And so I was a buck sergeant, which only took me 3 years, where normally it would take probably 6 years, I guess, to get to that rank.
And what were your dates of service?
October 1969 to October 66 to 69.
So 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and where did you go to basic training?
I went to basic training in Fort Lewis, Washington. It's just outside of Seattle, and where it rains 90% of the time.
And what was it like for you, basic training?
Basic training to me was, it was okay. I was in good shape. I worked on a farm, so we done most things by hand, so I was in good shape. But it rained there every day I was there, and we were crawling through the mud. We'd get up at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning and go out and do exercises for 2 hours in the rain, and then we'd done all kinds of things. We'd had to crawl under this barbed wire, and then they'd tell us there was gas, and we had to put our gas masks on underneath this barbed wire. And so it wasn't good because of the fact it rained all the time I was there. One good point about it was they knew that we were going to go to Vietnam, and our commanding officer, right, we had 2 weeks left, and he let us go home for a week, and then we went back and finished our basic training. So that was a surprise to us. We got to go home for a week for Christmas, actually.
And what group were you assigned to?
I was assigned to the 281st Assault Helicopter Company, and I went to Fort Rucker, Alabama, actually, to learn mechanics on it. And back then they didn't have a lot of things to teach you with, the computers or any of that sort of thing. And I remember we used to, for some reason, they taught us how to start up a fixed wing engine. And it was the controls were in a box like an outhouse, and the engine stuck outside. And one of us would get out there and crank that up, and the other one would sit in there and use the throttles and different things and look at the gauges and everything to make sure things were going right. But I learned a lot. I learned about mechanics on it. You had to have at that time a certain grade to go to the second class to learn more about it. And I was one of those. I did get to go and learn through the second class to learn more about those helicopters.
So you got what you wanted.
Yes.
You wanted to work on helicopters, and
Yes.
you ended up doing that.
Yes.
All right, so what happens in the second advanced training for helicopter mechanics?
Well, they teach you more about the details, like the first one just teaches you about basic things. But in the second class, you get to learn about those engines we looked at, and they taught us how to do different mechanics on their turbine engines, and we knew all the parts, and then we'd have to, basically, they would do tests on us to see if we could figure out what was wrong with them. If one of them, they'd fix it so something would go wrong and we had to fix it. It was, I enjoyed it, because it was just something that I'd never seen a turbine engine before, and so that's something that was really good, that we got to go to that second class and learn about the turbines and what they did and how they functioned.
And how long was that?
That took me about, I think, about 6 weeks, going through 2 different classes and then actually working on those engines.
Besides engines, did you learn any other maintenance or repair issues with the helicopters?
We learned a lot about the helicopters. They taught us how to balance the blades. The main rotor on those blades have to be balanced almost perfect. And they'd go out and start one, and we'd have to wrap this tape around it, the end of it. That's how they did it. And if it was off, we'd wrap the tape around it until we got it right, and then they'd figure out how much weight that was, and they'd put the weights in where they belong to keep them from, once they get off balance, it's quite a ride. It shakes, rattles and rolls, I guess.
And what type of helicopters are we talking about?
Well, the ones that I worked on and flew in was a D model Huey helicopter, and it was more for hauling troops in different places. We could only haul about 8 people plus our crew. So, and then we had the C model in our company, which were gunships, and there was only 4 people in there, and they had weapons. And they had like miniguns on them, rockets, and what they called a 40 mic on the nose, which turned and threw things like a shell about this big around and exploded, kind of like a grenade. So we had those 2 when we worked on.
And did you get any type of training or qualifications for any weapons besides your mechanic work?
I did not. But I was a door gunner in Vietnam, / crew chief / mechanic, so I got some quick training on the 1060 machine gun. I remember the first time I went out, the captain told me, the pilot, he was a captain, and he says, Rodgers, he says, when we go in, he says, I want you to fire at the tops of those trees. And so we went in. That was the first time I ever flew, and I was firing into these trees, and it worked okay. But he told me if that quits, just pull the bolt back and it'll start again. And it did quit on me, so I just pulled it back and it started again. And when we got out of there, he says, Rodgers, you can fly with me anytime. It was, and that's the first time I'd ever had any experience with him.
So that takes me to the next question of, after your training, what do you do next? So you end up deploying to Vietnam?
Yes, I got 30-day leave, went home, and then I got shipped out to Vietnam. And I had a bad experience when I was home on my leave. I had a 6-year-old nephew, and I was out at my sister's house, and him and his brother were outside playing, and his older brother came in and said that he'd got run over on the street out there. So I went flying out there and picked him up out of the street, and I knew he was pretty much gone. And my sister was 9 months pregnant, and I tried to hold her back from seeing him because it wasn't a good sign. So that happened before I went to Vietnam, the day before I was supposed to leave, as a matter of fact. And they told me to go talk to the principal of Blackfoot High School, and somehow I did that, and somehow he got a hold of him and told him the situation, and I got to stay another 3 or 4 days to go grease for him.
So how do you end up getting to Vietnam?
At that time, we were taking commercial flights to Vietnam. That's how we all got there. It took us about 16 hours to fly from there to Vietnam. First, when we went, we flew from Fort Lewis, Washington to Alaska, and from Alaska to Japan, and then from there to Vietnam. And it was a pretty fast trip. I was wishing it wasn't, but it was.
And where did you end up landing?
We lived in a place called Cameron Bay, and that's where they brought all the guys into and on those planes. And from there, Nhatrang wasn't too far from there. That's where our main base was. That's where I went. And so they put us in this bus. It was at night, and they didn't give us any weapons, and they had to drive us about 3 hours to where we were going to go, and we're in this bus, and we're not knowing what's going on. And so we're sitting there wondering what's going to happen to us on this bus ride. But fortunately, nothing happened. But I can tell you the worst, I think one of the worst parts of going there is I lit there, and I flew into Vietnam at night. I was on a window seat and I could see these guns flashing. I'm 19 years old. I'm going, man, it's something you can't explain. The feeling you have when you do that, experience that, is something it's hard to explain. You get these feelings and you don't know what's going to happen to you. You don't know what you're going to do. I mean, it was frightening.
So you're on a commercial flight
Mm-hmm.
with a bunch of other soldiers going to a strange land in a strange way,
Mm-hmm.
and while you're flying over Vietnam, you look down and you see explosions and guns going off. You see battles.
Right, I could see the flash of the guns because it was at night. And yeah, you can't imagine it. It's something that you just can't explain. And I can still feel that feeling today of what it was like when we were going into Vietnam, because it's just frightening, I think.
And what about the other guys on that plane? Was it quiet when you're looking out over?
Oh, it was very quiet. No one said a word, I don't think. If they did, I sure didn't hear it. And they were just sitting there looking out as I was and wondering, we didn't know anything about Vietnam. We didn't even know Vietnam existed until we got into the service. Or at least I didn't. But it was just a feeling of, well, it's almost like I was on that plane alone. Nobody was talking, nobody was saying anything. We were just sitting there wondering what was going to happen to us.
And tell me, when you get off the plane, what does it smell like? Do you remember the smell?
I do. I remember. You can smell, actually, the ocean. Where it was right on the coast. It was dry and sandy there. And it was really, really hot and humid. So you get those smells of the humidity in the ocean and different things, and because there's actually no plants around there either, or trees, it's just sand. So I remember those smells walking off that plane.
I've heard other veterans say that that's sometimes one of their most memorable moments, is the smell of either arriving or leaving.
Yeah, that's true. And like I said, it's something that most of us hadn't experienced because it's so humid. And then we're right on the ocean, and you can smell that salt air and different. And so it's something that stays with you.
So you're on that bus, you get to your base, you said it was Nhatrang?
Nhatrang.
And what do you end up doing there?
When I first got to Nhatrang, they put me as a mechanic, and later on I was a mechanic for a few months, and then they wanted me to fly, so they put me flying as a crew chief and a door gunner. We had M60 machine guns on each door. One of the guys was experienced with, well, not experienced, but had training for those M60 machine guns, which I hadn't. So it was an experience I don't know, it's all frightening, I guess, to us, because we were just 19 years old, average 19 years.
And your base, is it, where is it, first of all? Where's Nhatrang in Vietnam?
Nhatrang is in the southern part of Vietnam, about the southern part of Vietnam, and it's about, it's right on the coast of the ocean. You could walk to the ocean from there. it's a city, but it's all blown up and had bullet holes in all the walls and stuff. And the way the people lived was really terrible. They had these, they called them huts downtown, or houses, but they're made of everything from cardboard to tin or whatever they could find to make these places, and dirt floors. So it was a very smelly place because they didn't have toilets. They basically went wherever they needed to go to the restroom.
And did your base ever come under attack while you were there?
Yes, we had mortar attacks about once or twice a week. And I remember I was there during the Tet Offensive, which was the New Year's for Vietnamese New Year. And our politicians in Washington decided they were going to sign a 3-day truce at that time, which they did. And all that did was give the North Vietnamese Army and the Viet Cong to get troops where they wanted them and get to where they wanted them. And after the truce, they attacked everywhere, every city in Vietnam, I mean, all at the same time, because it just gave them time. I remember one time during that time that I went out and got on the chopper, and we have headphones in our helmets, and we talked to the pilots, of course, and he told us we weren't able to fire our guns that day. Well, I had a big long cord on there, and I got off. And that pilot looked out there and he said, "Rogers, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm going to tell you something." I said, "I'm not going to fly if I can't use this gun." And I said, "There's something you might want to think about." I said, "I'm your only protection." And he says, "Well, okay, get back on." So I got back on. Like, we didn't have to use our weapons that day, but it was one of those things. Vietnam was a political thing, and we couldn't fight the way we wanted to.
And so how soon, when you're at your base, are you recruited now to be a crew chief and gunner?
Probably I was there about 4 or 5 months I guess longer, 6 months, and they needed people to fly, so they asked me if I would, and I said I agreed to it, and I flew the rest of the time I was there. And then when I went back, I went up there twice, and when I went back I did the same thing. I was a door gunner and a crew chief. And, the crew chief was a pretty big deal. You could tell anybody, I don't care what rank he was or anything, what to do, and they had to do it. And I had an experience with a captain one time. He told me he wasn't rolling down his sleeves because that kind of protects you if you get in a fire. And he told me he wasn't going to roll them down. I said, "Sir, you will roll them down or this chopper won't go nowhere." So they shut it down, and he took me into my commanding officer. And my commanding officer says, "What's going on, Rogers?" And I said, "Well," he says, "he's not going to roll his sleeves down," which is regulation. And he was a major. His name was Major Ruskoff, a great person, a great guy. And the captain said, "No, I'm not going to roll my sleeves down." He said, "Well, you're going to have a long walk because you're not going to get on this until you do what he tells you to do." He says he knows more about these helicopters than you'll probably ever know. And there are regulations, and you have to follow them. So, and I didn't like getting picky like that, but it's something we had to do. It was regulations, So, being the crew chief, you had the power on there. I mean, of how many people were on, how the load, everything over it, other than the pilots, and of course they flew, and we didn't tell them much what to do. People on there we could.
So tell me who makes up the crew of a helicopter.
There's a co-pilot, a pilot and a co-pilot, and then the two door gunners on each side. And I served as a gunner and a crew chief and a mechanic, actually. So we had 4 members of the crew.
And that's standard.
Yes.
And then you take up to 8 troops.
Yes.
So you have 12 on board.
Right.
Right. And so what was your first mission like when you go out on that helicopter?
The first mission, you get the same feelings almost as bad as when I landed. You don't know what's going to go on. You don't know where you're going most of the time because they don't name these places because most of them don't have names. It's jungle. And so we went out and what we did, the first time I flew, it was I don't know how to explain it. It's just right down frightening and scary because you don't know what to do. You don't know what's happening. You don't know if you're supposed to fire your gun weapon or not because they didn't give you much training on that sort of thing. So it was very, very the same feeling. I can't explain the feeling you have because it's just something that unless you do it, you'd never know.
And are your missions typically you're inserting and extracting?
Yes, that's what we did. We'd put men in, we'd come in and drop them in, sometimes in a hot landing area, which is where you could be shot at and some aren't. But we'd put them in, and then if they got in trouble, we'd go back in and take them out. And sometimes we'd just drop them off, and sometimes we'd go out and pick up other guys that had been dropped off before to get them out before they all got killed.
And when you're going out on these missions, how many other helicopters are going with you?
It varies. It varies on how many people there are, or anywhere from 2 to 8. It just depends on what we're doing. We went on a hill one time on a mountain to pick some guys up. They were in trouble and we got them, and they were, I was the second chopper to go in, well actually the last chopper to go in, and they were in trouble, so we were trying to get them on. They were trying to thank us and all this, and I'm jerking them in saying, come on guys, we'll talk later. But those things, at that time, it was scary, and you didn't know what to expect. We'd get them out. We got those guys out that day, and I remember my pilot saying, we can't take this last man. And I said, if you think I'm going to leave one person here 1 year, you're wrong. And I told the guys, get on, and I drug him in, and we went on into our base. But I can't imagine what would have went through my mind the rest of my life if I'd have left one man there by himself. I mean, I would have never done it because I knew what I would feel if they told me you're going to stay here alone. That doesn't make any sense. And we were actually a little bit overloaded, but we made the trip.
So in that particular mission, you're going to extract somebody, a group,
Yeah.
and they were having a problem.
Right.
And so you're flying into what they call a hot zone.
Yeah.
And so tell me how that works.
Well, when we went in, we didn't fire our weapons because these guys were all over the top of this hill. It wasn't much space up there, but they were kind of watching everything, and they were making sure that they were protecting each other as well as us. But we couldn't fire our weapons because you know, there wasn't a fire at it at that time because it's a place about, oh, it was probably maybe 50 feet wide up on the top of this hill. So we didn't want to hurt our own troops, so we just went in without firing and got them out. They kind of protected us as we were coming in.
Did you ever travel with medics when you go on these evac missions?
I never traveled with medics. That's a whole new thing. They have medevac ships, which they call them. And of course, they got a cross on them, a red cross. But those guys aren't allowed to carry weapons, and they're not allowed to have any weapons on that chopper. And I'll tell you, that was a dangerous thing what they did, and I got to hand it to them. They have a lot of nerve. They have very brave people. They were people that cared, and they would go in without guns and get people out.
Well, that wouldn't stop the enemy from shooting them, though, right?
No, that cross up there is basically a target. But the Geneva Convention, I don't know if you've heard of the Geneva Convention or not, but that's one of the rules, that they can't do that. And you're not supposed to shoot at them. Well, the enemy does shoot at them, I guarantee you they do. I've seen them come in with bullet holes all across the tail of them.
All right, so about how many of these missions do you think you've gone through?
I had to go through, to get my wings, I had to have 500 hours of combat to get them. So I don't know how many missions, but I know it was 500 hours at least, and beyond that, because I stayed longer than that. But that's the requirement, is at least is 500 combat hours.
And for you, what was, in your mind, more nerve-wracking? Bringing troops in or taking them out?
I think taking them out, because they're in trouble. I mean, that's the only reason why we're taking them out, because they were in trouble and there was enemy around them and they were fighting them. And so it's more dangerous, I think, taking them out than it is to drop them in. We had to drop them into some hot spots, but normally it wasn't hot spots. We knew what was there before we landed, so that wasn't too bad. But taking them out, you're getting them out of the mess that they're in and trying to save their lives as well as our own.
So that I can understand, describe to me what it's like to land in a hot zone to extract them. With, I mean, the sounds, the rotor, if there's chaos or not chaos, like what is that like?
I think that,
and how long does it last?
I think that our crews and our company were very well trained. I think that it was nerve-wracking and you didn't know what to expect. And we went in with our weapons firing, and I never paid much attention to it until this. I went to a museum in Palm Springs here lately, and my daughter's friend, he gave me a T-shirt and it had Huey's on it, and I never even thought about it. But when you go into one of those places, you got eight machine guns firing at the same time, so it's, you know, it's a very complicated mission, and you have to do it just right to make sure you're not shooting at your own people. And to us, that was, I don't know, after a while it's just a normal day. You're still frightened, you're scared, you don't know what's going to happen. But those guys on the ground, they loved them choppers. They loved them. And when they come in, when we'd go to get them out, they knew that they were pretty much going to be safe getting them out. In fact, when we were at that museum, we seen a chopper like the one I flew in. It was kind of cool because it had a sign on it that said, "Take me home, Huey," which was very, I guess, fulfilling to see that, to know that I had taken part in that.
Mm-hmm. So you're landing, it's hot. Do you ever do it at night?
No, we didn't go in very much at night. If we did, we'd have to use spotlights and things, and that makes it even more dangerous. But I don't believe I ever went in at night that I remember. I went in maybe just dusk or early mornings.
All right, so you're making a landing, it's day, it's hot, humid,
Mm-hmm.
your blades are whirling, it's loud, I imagine.
Oh, they're really loud.
Guns are shooting
Mm-hmm.
from the helicopter. There's probably small arms fire around,
Right.
and you've got a lot of probably yelling and jumping and hooting and hollering and trying to get into that helicopter. Is that kind of the feeling?
Well, I don't think it was confusing because those guys on the ground were very organized as we were. I mean, I got to hand it to them, they were organized, and so were we. And so they would take groups at a time, and each chopper that came in would pick some up, and they knew exactly where they were going to go, and we knew exactly where we were going to go. I read a story about our company, but it was written by a full-blooded colonel, and he said, "I've had several commands." He says, "I've been in command of several different companies and different things," and he said, in my whole life, I've never seen a company as organized as the 281st Assault Helicopter Company, which is the one I was in, because he got command of one of those companies, and he says, "I've never seen anything like it." He says, "Everybody knew what to do, when to do it, how to do it," and he says, "I've never seen anything so organized in my life as what we were." So that was a real compliment.
Now, when you're flying troops to insert them, what's going on with those troops behind? I mean, they're behind you, right? They're in the
Right.
back. Do you hear them talking? Are they talking? Are they not? What are they doing?
You can't hear much because I am inside a chopper. You can't hear much sound. In fact, you could get shot at and not know it most of the time. But they were ready to get out, and they would get on fast, and we'd try to get out as fast as we could. I mean, sometimes the enemy was close by. Sometimes they had gotten away from them a little bit in time for us to get in and get them out. So there's times we weren't fired at and times we were, and we didn't know going in there which one it would be. So, but it's kind of funny how people think. I'd be getting these guys on there, and after we got in the air, and they'd say, "You're crazy for flying up here." And these are infantry guys. And I told them, I said, "Well, I think you're crazy for being down there." So that shows you how the mental part works. That they thought they were safer than I was, and I thought I was safer than them. So it's a kind of a weird thing how people think.
Did you ever have to land in a village?
I lived there for several times in different villages, but not under fire. I remember landing in Korean camp one time, and we lived there, and I sat down on this sandbag, and this Korean guy, soldier, walked up and threw me off of this sandbag, and I looked at him like, "Where are you?" But I found out there was a snake right next to this thing. It was about this long, or about maybe that long. But anyway, he couldn't speak English, but one of the guys told me that he said that he did that because that snake was there, and he said, "You have about 3 to 4 minutes to get in to take care of yourself, to take care of it, or you're dead." I was ready to fight with him. And then I found out he saved my life.
You mentioned the Tet Offensive. Did you participate in any type of missions during that?
During Tet, we did go out a few times, but what they did during Tet is they hit the main bases. They hit the main cities and the main bases. So we didn't go out much during it, but we were right in the middle of it. I remember one time they had been mortaring our base for several days, 2 or 3 days, and we couldn't figure out nobody could figure out where they'd come from, where they were at, and so they called in the Air Force, and they came in with these fighter jets and tried to find it, and they couldn't. But we had rigged up a helicopter at that time to see what it would do, but it had 50 caliber machine guns, M60s, rockets, everything on it. And we called it Lobo. And our commanding officer got on there and asked that pilot if it'd be all right if Lobo came in. And the guy says, "What's Lobo?" And he says, "I can't explain it, just let us go in." So I didn't fly on that one, but it went in, and these guys, that pilot in that fighter jet, he was amazed. He says, "I don't know what the heck," he didn't say heck, he said, "I don't know what Lobo is, but I'm staying out of his way." But 2 days later, a few days later, I flew on a flight that was called the Sniffer mission. And very few guys could fly on that because they'd get sick. But what we'd do is we'd fly at the tree level, and we'd turn like this and go up and down. One time when you're sitting on all you can see is the ground. We flew with our doors open because our guns were mounted on the outside. And one time you look down and you can't see nothing but the ground. The next time you can't see nothing but the sky. But we had, when we flew that mission, we had a ship up high watching to see if anybody, our main mission was to get somebody to shoot at us, to find out where they were at. And anyway, we went in there and they called in the gunships, and we didn't know that until we got in. But the guy on the gunship, he says, "Clint, didn't you see them guys, that guy in that cave down there firing at you?" And I said, "No, we were going too fast." I said, "I couldn't see nothing." And he said, "Man, he had an automatic weapon just firing away at the guy." He says, "But we took care of it. We put a rocket right in the mouth of that cave." I said, "Well, thanks, I appreciate it."
So you did 2 tours.
Yes.
All right. So
I actually, the first time a year and the second time about 5 months, because I was ready to get out. I was going to get out in 5 months. I put in to go back over a year before, but it took, by the time my orders came down, I only had 5 months left in the service, so I went back for 5 months.
okay. So what was the most memorable thing from your first tour?
I don't know, I think one of the most memorable things of that is I just got there and I was just there a few days. And they put me on guard duty out in the motor pool by myself, nobody else but me. It's just pitch dark out there. These 2.5 ton trucks that they use, they call them a deuce and a half. And they have this air thing in them, and when it flips over, them things start beeping real loud. Anyway, I was walking in front of this truck out there by myself, and that thing went off somehow, and I'm telling you, I came unglued. But I walked up to the door and opened the door, and there was nobody there. It had just came on by itself. But I'll never forget how scared I was when that thing went off. I didn't know if there was somebody in that truck or what was going on. So the first time was that. I had a lot of memories of all of it, but that was when I first got there.
And what made you go back for a second?
Well, at that time I didn't think about it. I just wanted to go back. I don't know why, but when I started going to the psychologist after our family had grown up and everything, she said the reason that she talked to a lot of veterans, Vietnam veterans that went back, and she said the reason for that is because she said you get used to that adrenaline rush. She says when you come home, it's gone immediately. So she says you have a tendency of wanting that adrenaline rush again, and you volunteer to go back. And so she said that's the main reason that most of them went back. She said there was a lot of them that volunteered to go back. Second time.
And what happened? Anything notable on your second tour?
On the second tour, I think it was a little bit better than this first one because I was acquainted with it. I knew what was going on. I was experienced. But I think the most memorable one was we were dropping down. We had to go into this jungle, and we were alone, just one chopper. And we had to drop straight down into these trees. And I'm on one side and my door gunner on the other, and we're guiding these pilots in, and I'm looking up, and the blades are missing these trees by about this far. And we'd just tell them to the left, or I'd tell them, the gunner would say right, and I'd say left, and we landed him okay, but that was a weird deal because you didn't know what was in those trees or anything. It was just jungle, and it was just a spot big enough for us to drop down into. But what had happened is one of the guys fired a weapon in there, and I seen him coming through the trees, and it had blown up on him in his face. And so we picked him up and we flew him to a hospital ship just off the coast of Nhatrang. And we dropped him off there. And landing on that ship was a very memorable experience because when we lit, you have a circle there you land in. But coming off, that wasn't bad landing, but when you come off, you have to come up and kind of peel off. And when we got over the water, we just started dropping because there wasn't much lift, and we're going, whoa, wait a minute. But it took a few seconds, and we're dropping, and then all of a sudden we started coming back up again. So that was pretty memorable. But
That was an unwanted roller coaster ride.
yeah, it was. It was very, very different. But most guys didn't get that experience, but it was quite an experience landing on there.
Did you ever get injured?
No, not as far as weapons are concerned, I didn't. No.
And your helicopter got shot at or no?
Oh yeah, we got, well, a lot of times you can't tell because you're flying in there and there's so much racket and everything. The only way you could tell is to see if there were holes in it when you came in, which fortunately, I don't know how, but our choppers usually came out without any, but the medic ships, those guys, I don't know why they flew on them. They were a lot braver than I am, I'll tell you. They deserve a lot of credit.
Did they medic helicopters? Did they have like an airship or a gunship backup?
Yeah, well they did, but very seldom were they used because these guys had come in and tried to get these guys out real quick, and so there wasn't much time. They had to go in real quick and get out, but they did have other choppers around, yes, if they needed them.
And did you receive any awards or medals for your service?
I served, I got my wings because I did have 500 combat hours, and then I got a Navy Accommodation Medal for rescuing one of the Navy pilots out of the ocean. We got him out.
So he had to abandon his plane over the water?
Actually, he got shot down and he lit in the ocean, and we had to go in and pick him up, which is hard to do. It's a very difficult thing to do because you don't have that lift over the water as you do over the land. But I did get that medal.
Did you ever have an opportunity to interact with any of the Vietnamese?
Yes, we interacted with them quite often. We would get a couple of days off every 2 months or so, and we'd go in town and we'd be able to communicate with them. And we couldn't we couldn't understand a lot of it. We understood some of it, but not all of it. But it was Vietnam. I don't know how those people survived, because you go in those villages and they have these, like for instance, chickens were hanging up in the windows, no cooler or nothing, and they're selling these chickens, and I'm going, man, how did that happen that they don't get food poisoning and die? But they're very, I don't know, they were really nice to us. They was not rude in any way to us. They liked us being there because we were trying to help them out. So they were happy to see us. And I remember we'd go down and eat the shrimp in one of their places there. It was the best shrimp you'd ever tasted. And of course we didn't have a lot of great food. I mean, we weren't starving by no means, but it was nice to kind of go down and see them.
Did you ever have concerns about interacting with them versus the Viet Cong? Like, how do you tell them apart?
No, you can't tell them apart. They dress the same and everything, so you can't tell them apart. That's one of the things was it was really fearful was going in there, because you couldn't tell them from the regular citizens. They had two groups. They had the North Vietnamese Army, and they're dressed in uniforms, and you can tell them. But the Viet Cong, they dress just like anybody else, so you can't tell one from another.
Did you ever have any opportunities to interact with a North Vietnamese soldier or Viet Cong?
Yeah, we had, not the Viet Cong or the North Vietnamese soldiers, but we had South Vietnamese soldiers, and they were right behind us. We were a support unit for 5th Special Forces is what we did, and they had some soldiers there with them. They were training us.
Have you heard the phrase "war is hell"?
Yes, I have.
Do you agree with that?
Well, I don't know what hell is, so I don't know. I think I can tell you one thing. It's something that I wouldn't want anybody to experience. I wouldn't send my worst enemy in there if I could keep him out, because it's just one of those things you can't explain it. It's just and one of the things about it is you actually get used to that. You get used to that. You get used to the mortar rounds coming in at night. You get used to everything. And to me, I don't know if that's good or bad to get used to that kind of thing. But when I first got there, I mean, it was crazy to hear those mortars hitting around you. And then after a while, you just got to where you really didn't, well, you paid attention to them, but it was just a day. It wasn't all day, but you would sure run for cover.
And you would you would obviously see combat on your combat missions.
Mhm.
You'd see injured soldiers,
Mhm.
right? Any casualties you have to pull into your helicopter?
No. That's what we didn't have one person. We had some people, guys got shot, but we didn't have any deaths, and how that ever happened, I don't know, but it did. And but we had some guys that got shot and had to be taken to. One of them had to go to Japan, and one of them had. He came back 3 days later with a sling on. He'd been shot in the arm. So.
When you go out on any of your missions, did you have any type of a ritual or a habit that you would do? Whether you go have a drink, you pray, did you do anything that you would always try to do all the time?
I think one of the things that most of us did, we'd pray in our mind and say, I hope I come home. And when you go out, one of the things you think about is your family at home. I didn't have a family as far as kids. I was single. But, my biggest regret about going back after I got out was I did that, and my mother and father and my family had to go through that a second time. And I really felt bad that I did it, but I did. So.
Did anything from your experience from Vietnam impact you when you returned home?
When I returned home, I met my wife 2 months later, but I was basically an alcoholic. I drank constantly. And she had to go through that with me for 10 years. I don't know why she stuck with me, but she's saved my life. And I didn't realize a lot of things then. I didn't know about PTSD or anything like that. So, but I think that's what it was. And you come home and those memories come back. You never talk to anybody. You never talk to anyone about it. When I first talked to my psychologist, I told her some things, and she says, "You've been holding that in for 40 years." And I said, "Yeah." And she says, "You haven't told anyone?" And I said, "No." And she says, that's amazing. She said, "It's no wonder you have PTSD because you've never sat down and talked to anyone about it." I didn't even tell my wife or anyone about different things. And so, in fact, someone asked my sister, she said, ask her about it. And she said, she told him she didn't even know what I did because I didn't say much about it.
Can you share one of those things that really impacted you?
And I hope I can without crying. I remember one time we were flying up in this area we were flying in. It was supposed to be a clear area, and all the Vietnamese people knew that. But we went into this area, and there was a little circle opening there, and we went across it at first, and then I saw that grass hut down there, and I told the pilot, I said, "Sir, there's a grass hut down there." And so we peeled off and went back around and come down it again. And I didn't know anybody had called the gunships. Well, when I looked down there were a family of people, and they were running for that grass hut. And about that time I saw this rocket come by my door. I can still see that rocket today, and it hit that blew it up. No, those kids were in there. So that's probably, and I think kids were the worst thing about war. It's because kids are, I think it was worse because I had to I had to pick my nephew up, my 6-year-old nephew up out of the street before I went. And then you got to see these kids, but I kind of felt responsible because I was the one that told the pilot about it, and they fired a rocket into it and destroyed it. I could see parts flying around.
Your pilot's the one that fired the missile?
No, he came, the gunships came in behind
Okay.
us. And that's how I seen that rocket. It came within 8 feet of my door and it went and hit that. But nobody had seen those kids or anything but me. Or if they did, they didn't tell me about it when we lit. No one said anything about it, so I don't think anybody's seen it but me. That was one of the things I had to tell my psychologist over and over and over again. She made me repeat that. And that PTSD is something that comes and goes, I guess. I still see the psychologist, and I've been seeing her for 8 years, I guess, 10 years or so. But those kind of things never disappear, but she sure helped me to live with it.
Do you think that the alcohol was a way to cope with that?
I know it was, yes. Now, afterwards, I didn't know at that time. I think I had PTSD at that time, and after I started going to the psychologist, my wife said, that makes sense, because she knew that I had drank for 10 years. I mean, really drinking hard. And so, but I went back to church and I had a bishop that helped me get through the alcohol and the cigarettes.
What did you do to replace the adrenaline rush?
I think it was the booze. I think it was just drinking. Because you can't, it doesn't, and I didn't know that at the time, but after I talked to the psychologist, she told me that that had a lot to do with it, but not talking about those experiences had a lot to do with it. She said, I can't believe you've held that in for 40 years and you've never told anyone. And I said, no. She said, did you talk to that about, to the guys that flew in there with you? And I said, nobody said a word, and I didn't. I'm just kidding.
And that feeling that you had and you're having now, when did it first present itself to you?
It first presented it to me after my family grew up. And then I started getting these thoughts back and different things, because during the time I was raising my family, I didn't have time to think. I was taking care of my family. And my psychologist told me, she says, I asked her, she said, PTS does that. You hold it in and you don't tell people. You don't talk to anyone. And she says that drinking was how you coped with it. But she says after your family's gone, you have time to think. And I didn't know I even had PTSD until that time when she talked to me the first time, because I'd been having problems. And so I got into the VA in Pocatello, and I went to this psychologist, and she was a lady. Man, she saved my life a few times. She was a great lady.
What was the amount of time from the time you left the service till you first started to have those feelings? How many years had passed?
Well, I guess she said it was about 40 years before they came back. During the drinking, I didn't think about it. And I didn't think about it until after my family was raised and gone. And then they started coming back.
Did you have any type of like guilt as well as a result of that?
There's always guilt, I think, to most Vietnam veterans with PTSD and things you've seen, like the experience I told you. But I think just about all of them had a PTSD because we weren't allowed to fight the way because you could have fought. Had to wait for them to come to us, and I think we all felt guilty over losing that war. Well, I don't think we lost it. I think, but you get that feeling you lost this war, and you get a guilty feeling that you hadn't done enough, I guess.
And did you have any feeling of guilt or regret that you, I'm not saying that it was right, but that, or justified, but that maybe you could have stopped, like did you feel responsible for that hut even though you had nothing to do with it?
Yes, I did feel guilty. I thought that was my fault because I was the one that saw it, and I was the one that told the pilot, and the pilot called in the gunship. So, yeah, I feel responsible for it.
Anything else that you mentioned drinking, perhaps feelings of guilt, anything else that exhibited itself from the Vietnam War for you?
I think at one time I pulled away from my family. I didn't want to be with the kids. In fact, we were living here in American Falls, and I pulled away from my wife and my family, and I didn't want to be around them. I just got to a point where I just didn't want to be around them. And that's when other things happened, and I get angry real quick, very quick anger, and that's what this psychologist helped me to. You never get rid of it, but you can deal with it. That's what happened.
What about nightmares? Do you replay any events in your mind?
I've had a few. I haven't had a lot, but there's been times when I woke up and my wife said I was screaming and different things, but it hasn't happened a lot, but it did happen.
So your second tour ends when?
I got my second tour ended of October of '69, and that's when I got out when I came home. I'd served all my time and got out when I came home.
And where did you go when you returned home?
I went back home to Blackfoot. That's where I met my wife.
All right. But where did you actually return in the States?
Oh,
San Francisco?
I returned to Seattle, where I had taken to Fort Lewis, where I had taken my basic training.
Okay. And how were you welcomed when you returned home?
I think in a small town like Blackfoot, it was okay, but there were times when, well, for instance, one time we were in an airport and I heard these guys talking about they had dodged the draft and said something about those. We weren't welcomed at home at all, only by family. And luckily I grew up in a small town where it wasn't really every day, but we weren't welcomed home. It was like, I don't know, like we had done the wrong thing, I guess. We shouldn't have been there and we shouldn't have went. But these guys were talking about it, and I started to go over to them, and my wife grabbed my arm and pulled me back. And I said, I'm not going to stand here and hear these guys say that, but she stopped me.
When you returned home, were you in your full uniform?
Yes.
And
Actually, when I lived in Fort Lewis, Washington, I was in my fatigues, and they were all dirty and faded, and my boots and stuff. When I got off, there were some new recruits there, and they were still in their civvies. And I looked at them, I thought, man, you wonder how many of them are going to make it home. But then when I got to Blackfoot back to home, they gave us a dress uniform to come home in.
Any incidents in the airport when you were in your fatigues?
No, I never wore my fatigues in the airport because I had gotten out, but that I was in my civilian clothes when this happened. I'd already got out and was married.
What did you do when you got back home?
When I got back home, I stayed with my mother and father for a while, and my dad was running cattle for some people out in Springfield, outside of Blackfoot. And this man owned a fish hatchery, so I went to work down at this fish hatchery for several months and worked there. And it wasn't too long after that I got married and we moved to Texas.
What'd you do down in Texas?
We got into a company and we subcontracted plastering for swimming pools in Dallas. And then after that I got into the grocery business first. I was in Dallas for 20 years and then we got into the grocery business and we went basically a lot of places, different places.
And how'd you get back here?
How did I get back here? Well, we were born and raised here.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my older brothers passed away. And it dawned on me, I just wanted to be close to my family, so we moved back. And then we got into the grocery business and traveled all over.
So you continue grocery business here?
Yeah, we got into it in Blackfoot, but we traveled. We were in Twilla, Utah. We were in Vallejo, California, Bakersfield, California, Butte, Utah, or Butte, Montana, and several places. Traveled.
Is there anything you'd like to add that I did not ask you?
I don't think so. I think that you've done a great job, but I talk to these guys coming home now, and I'm very warm. I'm very glad that they get the reception that we didn't get. In fact, I bought them. We've seen them in some restaurants, and I paid for their lunch and different things. But people have changed about the Vietnam veterans. They've slowly transitioned into the fact that we weren't baby killers or rapists, and I credit that to the news media because what they said about us, they were putting stuff on there about us that was completely false. I mean, I'm sure it happened, some of those on occasion, but they made it into like every soldier in Vietnam was a bad person. But I'm very glad that these guys are getting the reception they deserve.
Is there anything that you would like to tell future generations? Any type of advice or wisdom?
Well, I think future generations, I think families are a very important thing. I think we have to stay close to our families. And I think we have to, I hope that they speak out when things are going downhill like they are now. I think it's time to speak out. I think we need to let people know that we're not going to put up with what's going on. I hope they're brave enough, and I hope they do that. I hope they stick up for their rights. That's the main message I would give them, just to stand up and fight for their freedoms and for the Constitution of this country and be loyal to it.
Well, I want to thank you, Clinton, for the wonderful interview and taking the time to meet with me today. And I want to thank you for your 2 tours in Vietnam and the service to your country.
Thank you. I'm glad that you came to talk to us. I appreciate you because I know you do this on your own time, and we appreciate it.
All right, thank you.